and become aware of His supreme teaching. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we all together be submerged in the depth of His doctrine and gain wisdom as deep as the ocean. I take refuge in the Sun. May we all together become units in true accord in a life of harmony, in a spirit.
A time of remembrance, a time of reflection. As the Tri-State Buddhist Temple celebrates its 75th anniversary, it's time to honor the past and consider the future. Tri-State is unique in America, perhaps in the world. It is part of the Buddhist Churches of America, the Jodo Shinshu Buddhist organization in this country. But it is unique because its 9-member temples and innumerable Howakais, or Buddhist study groups, are separated by hundreds of miles and served by traveling ministers. Reverend Ono, Denver's first Buddhist minister, arrived in 1916.
When he came, he went around the area visiting homes and giving sermons.
Reverend Ouchi, who came in 1929, traveled throughout Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming, wherever there were Japanese settlers who needed his services. Japanese immigrants had come to this area in the early 1900s, primarily to farm.
I think the history of Fort Lupton and its Japanese, as written by Mr. Watada back in, I believe it was 1983, he said that the very first Japanese came into Lupton in 1903, and from that time on it was just people coming in with seeking labor or things to do, because there was a labor manager here.
Well, we were almost 100% all engaged in agriculture.
Oh, what kind of farming?
Vegetable farming.
What was the crop that they farmed?
Sugar beet, and then at that time we were raising some vegetables, cabbage and onions.
Some Japanese farmers were recruited by developers. Some were attracted by the opportunity to buy land of their own.
Well, at first, you see, you weren't allowed to aliens, couldn't own land.
Oh.
Yeah. So they were working at the beginning as laborers.
Does anybody remember what year that became legal where you could own your own land?
Well, I think it's after the second generation. Nisei started, and then it was able to. They had a 99-year lease deal there.
One of the things that we were talking about a couple of nights ago was that Japanese Americans weren't able to own land along California, and because of that, and a lot of them were farmers, and they were interested in farming their own land, but they couldn't do it in California. So when they had an opportunity and a realtor came out and offered the land here where they could own it, then they decided, well, if it's a good place to farm, then let's move there.
The wives often worked in the fields alongside their husbands.
From morning till night, I gather up the pickle vines, pick the pickles, and put them in pails. Over and over, making sure not to pick the large ones, because they would be grade 3 instead of grade 1. We had no money to buy horses or equipment, so we were forced to share a crop. We got only 30-some%. That's why it was so hard. Even with a big belly, waiting for the baby to be born, it was hard. It was difficult. I had to cook, keep house, do laundry, take care of the kids, and work in the fields. I had to leave the children at home by themselves. In the hot weather, I'd lay the children on a cloth by the car, or leave them inside the hot car, sweating profusely. I'd hear them crying, the children, the small children. Why did I come to such a terrible place? In Rocky Ford, we worked for a Caucasian farmer. It was hard. Pulling weeds in onion fields, thinning beets, my sons. The kids really worked hard.
The men had arrived in this country first, young and single. After a few years, they sent back to Japan for brides. Marriages were arranged. Often the newlyweds saw each other for the first time on the day of the wedding.
How many of you married for love?
There were a lot of picture marriages at that time. Most of the brides were 21 or 22. The men wanting to marry were Issei's over 30. It was like coming to marry an old man.
Some men did not send recent photos of themselves to Japan, but a much younger, more handsome picture.
Was yours an arranged marriage?
I went with a friend to my prospective bride's home to meet her through the go-between. When I wanted to talk with her, she had hidden in the cornfield.
Did she hide because she didn't like you?
No, because she was shy. Were you disappointed in coming to America?
No, I had a gentle husband who took good care of me. I'm very grateful. For the first 2 years, I wanted to return to Japan, and I cried every day. Some 10 Issei ladies came and comforted me. Because they suffered numerous hardships too, they convinced me to stick it out. I thought I would return in 10 years. I never wanted to return. I thought I would return in 5 years. For 30 years, I wanted to return. I never considered returning.
But whether or not they wanted to return, most stayed and built their lives here. They organized Japanese associations, Sunday schools, Japanese language schools for their children, and various social and cultural activities.
We had services such as Hanamatsuri and Obon. There were many Isseis, and compared to today, more people attended. We used to look forward to these events with great pleasure.
I guess one of the things that I see is that the Buddhist Temple was more than just a religious place. It was social reinforcement during the war. It was cultural reinforcement for Japanese people.
I think the thing that impressed me the most about when the Sunday school was started was that in Walmart we really didn't have a minister. In fact, at this point in time, we still don't have a minister that comes out every week. But it was through the efforts of our parents and other people in the community. Like, for example, Jack Miyazaki he would conduct our services for us. And the parents would also conduct the classes. And it was kind of interesting for us because it was a learning experience for both. I think the teachers probably learned as much as the students did, but it made it more interesting for, I believe, us as students because it was easier to integrate the practical applications of Buddhism.
But did you guys hold a service of some kind every Sunday?
Oh, we used to when we had Sunday school. We had every Sunday, but ministers would only come maybe once a month.
Baseball was a favorite pastime.
At that time, this area was known as Yamato Village, and the Platte River was used to divide the area into 2 baseball teams, one from the west side and one from the east side. So there were quite a few people.
The fondest memories, the 2 things that they mentioned were really things that I remember about the early parts of when I remember the temple was the Father's Day picnic where we, had them up at the Canais Canyon and we had baseball games and Ben's dad would umpire and we'd bribe him with beer and get him so drunk he couldn't stand. But he was the older, it wasn't just the young guys that went fishing, it was the older guys that really, they were great fishermen. and Mr. Fuji especially, and they were real competitive. I mean, they really went after it, and they'd go like at 2 o'clock in the morning to go fishing, huh? Who got the biggest fish? Who got the most? And there was big contests. You know, I remember the kids, we spent weeks, literally weeks beforehand, coming after school, or months beforehand, huh? We'd come after school on Saturdays to come here to practice with the teachers, and we'd have to learn all these dances and songs and speeches and all kinds of things that really, well, at that time they were work, but as I look back on it now, it was the most fun time of the Buddhist Temple.
The theatrical group started in 1915.
We all brought lunches, and it was great fun. Everyone was proud of their own lunch. It would go on for 3 days.
They looked forward to coming to church because they didn't have any other activities. They had to work on the farm all the time, so they always looked for once a month service and Reverend Snow to bring in the movies that they could see.
The people were poor, but they gave what they could to the temple. The temples were built largely by the members themselves, working as volunteers.
They did not have money to buy shoes for their children, but still they donated to the temple. Mr. Yanaru started the Sunday school in Lupton. We had the Sunday school first, then the Japanese school was started.
We solicited help from every individual, that is the Japanese individual in the community, every businessman in the town of Fort Lupton. We had a few that objected, but by and large, we had the best set of contributors where we went over our goal in the spring of '39. As soon as the frost left the ground, we started construction. All the old-timers were, all the membership were farmers.
We built our own church, and I think it was probably one of the first Buddhist churches that was built from scratch. I mean, we had to put up the whole building. It wasn't just an old school that was taken over, or other hall, or some other building like that.
The people were encouraged by the example of Reverend Tamai, who served the tri-state community for 53 years.
And I think it was this era that we talk about the tri-state Buddhist temples. Because that one man's efforts, he started covering not only the Denver area, they had Lupton and Brighton and so forth. They had churches going in this area, but he just kind of branched off into the tri-state area of Wyoming, Nebraska, and started chapters there.
Among other things, Reverend Tamai helped organize formal women's groups.
With Reverend Tamai as the driver, we went around Brighton asking ladies to please join. And we got many ladies to join.
He was, I don't know how old he was real young. And we were living in Littleton, you know, it's farming, vegetable farming we were doing there. And I was hanging up clothes out in the yard, you know. I had to do all the family chores, so I washed the clothes and was hanging up. And I heard he came from Japan, but I haven't seen him. But one day when I was out hanging clothes, there was somebody standing there with a black suit on, and he looked like a young boy.
The hotel where he slept and everything, why then, they said any time it rained, why, you know, he'd have to put buckets and stuff on his bed, catch the water, and even shoes, why he would have to use cardboard, just like I have to do sometime, you know.
Well, remind Reverend Tamai, when he was here, church financially was very difficult, and a lot of ours, we can't even pay our dues. Only those days, only $6 dues a year, and even though a lot of people couldn't even pay the dues. So the Reverend Tamai says, voluntarily, he said, I don't want no wages. I want you people to just believe in Buddha. That's how he was great. I feel even today, it's very hard to find a person like this. That's what I believe.
Well, I think this has been repeated time and again as far as Reverend Tamai, how much he sacrificed. There's an article in this book. This Denver church had a debt of $5,000, and they weren't paying anything for it because the membership, as I understand it, they must be having a hard time, but they weren't paying, and they had the money borrowed from the bank, and they had to at least meet the interest on it. And I understand at one time he went 8 months without getting a penny for his efforts.
They more or less call him the living Buddha.
The first generation, the Isseis, struggled to give their children a Japanese education.
We had several teachers. The teachers that we hired came over to this country and were studying at universities, you know, or colleges. And during the summer vacation, they came out here, and we hired them to teach our children here.
So they stayed in homes?
Well, yes, at first, and then we built a little house right beside the school, so they stayed there during, well, it's a couple of months is what, that's all. That's about all the time they did during the summer there.
During our summer break, the winter, 9 months I'd go to, you know, American school, and then in 3 months in the summertime, they took 2 months off and we had to go to Japanese school.
And so our parents wanted to get the young people together some way, and this is where this YBL idea came. I think it was around 1931 or 2, because a lot of our parents pushed the idea to Reverend Tamai. He got the idea of trying to get the young people from Fort Lupton. They were supposed to be a very religious group, and so for us to get the San Luis Valley bunch to get together with Fort Lupton group, and some of the parents went along with us. The Lupton people put us up in their homes for the day or two that we were there, so we could learn and meet each other. And this went the first year. The second year, the Lupton people came to the San Luis Valley. And I think that was the start of the YBL conference. And it's funny that it should come up, but we used to, after we started on state level, it was held at the church here. And also the Christian church had their group too, and they were just equal amount, you know, about the same half and half, I suppose. And I know as a young person, we used to try to sneak out and and join the other group and see what's going on there. Look at the pretty girls, I suppose. but I think this was the start of the YBL, and
I might add, of course, there was also a little conflict in Reverend Tamai's thinking with the young people during those days, because Reverend Tamai was against dancing at that time, and of course we were in the heights, during the age where we wanted to socialize.
Some teenage boys went to Denver for their education.
Well, if you know 1942 Market Street, it's still there. The first floor was called a long, narrow building, and as you walked in, on one side there was what they call the mirror room, I guess. Mirrors all over. It was a house of prostitution at one time. We had 2 boys in each room, and the teachers had their own, I guess, to take turns cooking, and it was all the same food, I think.
No wonder you wouldn't want to cook.
And we used to eat rice 3 times a day, and they used to deliver a sack of rice every 3 days. That's a lot of rice, but it was cheap in those days too, and we had to kind of prorate the expenses. So we naturally, well, we didn't plan it that way, but we're eating as cheap as we can. I was there in the harvest months, and all these farmers in Brighton and Lupton would bring their produce to sell at the, what was the Narga Market?
Cherry Creek. Cherry Creek.
But when they couldn't sell something, a lot of the friends would bring it to the church, and they would just dump the vegetable there, and we'd have to, well, we appreciated that, we didn't have to buy it. And I remember George Ogura, he hated carrots, and they found out that he hated carrots. So whenever we got carrots, why, they'd fill his plate full of carrots. And there was certain food that I didn't like celery, but they didn't know it. So they didn't load me with celery. But at one time, I know we got about 20, I guess you call them crates of celery.
皆さんと共に心からお喜び申し上げたいと思います。なお先ほどのお話もございましたように時間が限られております。
After a while, the Issei's realized that an English-speaking minister was required to adequately serve the Japanese Americans born in this country. That need was first filled by Reverend Tsunoda and his wife, who also was an ordained minister.
When I was probably like 8 or 10 years old, going to the monthly Sunday afternoon service. And the minister only spoke in Japanese, and my Japanese was very, very limited, so I didn't understand hardly anything that he said.
Reverend Tsunoda, because he was the first English-speaking minister that we got, and to me, that just meant that much more as far as understanding the religion.
As you know, she was very instrumental in Brighton, Lupton, and was always helping in every aspect of the church. She was also active in Denver, but she was always moving in all directions, and when she passed away, it was a very great loss.
Other English-speaking ministers and their wives have served the community as well. Reverend Kazumata is remembered particularly for his work with high school students. Reverend Sugiyama initiated an ambitious project to visit members at home, in the hospital, and in nursing homes. Reverend Oda worked tirelessly to edit and publish Buddhist texts in English. The current ministers continue to provide religious services to Buddhists throughout the region, traveling to New Mexico and Texas, as well as Colorado, Nebraska, and Wyoming. The younger generations owe much to the dedication and perseverance of those who preceded them.
At that time, there was discrimination. When we were going to school, we were separated from the Caucasians. They sat on one side of the room, and the Mexicans and Japanese were on the other. I will never forget what the first grade teacher said. It was 1924. The teacher said, "You're a Jap. Because you're a Jap, you should not have a Jap name." And so she gave me an English name. Also, you cannot use the Jap language here. Those were the first things we were told.
Some Colorado natives were trapped in Japan when the war broke out.
I was a person without a country, because you come over here, why they don't look upon you as, but in Japan, I'm an Issei, and so they would check on us time to time to see that we're not a spy or this or that, and we just don't belong. And I could write a whole book about the times that I was there and what we had to go through during the war.
During World War II, unlike the Japanese living on the West Coast, tri-state residents were not forced to evacuate, but there were various restrictions. Most of the temples closed for the duration.
How did the war impact this community?
Oh, not too bad. Of course, you know, we were all born and raised together, so everybody knew each other, and other than, you know, government restrictions like guns and cameras and stuff, we had to report to the courthouse.